All right. So if you haven't already, please put your name and district in the chat. Thank you to those of you who have done that already. And as an icebreaker, sort of get a temperature check on folks. What is one thing you wish you could change about New York City public school system? And we already have some great stuff in the chat. I'm going to be speaking slowly today because we have interpretation. But if you hear me talking fast, just tell me to slow down. So this workshop is hosted by the Education Council Consortium, which is a nonprofit grassroots organization made up of parent leaders and community members and advocates fighting for an anti-racist public school system in New York City through empowering parent leaders. We are also happy to have more UFT, Movement of Rank and File Educators, co-sponsoring this event, and we're very grateful for their contribution to this event tonight. Next slide. We're going to start with a very quick public school governance landscape. This is really about how public schools are organized in New York State. That's the broad overview we're going to start with. Next slide. What you would think about when we think about how schools are managed or operated, you would probably think about school boards or boards of education. This is how public schools are managed or operated in the vast majority of school districts in New York State. We have more than 700 school districts in New York State, all with its own Board of Education. These school boards are called boards of education. Members must be U.S. citizens. They must be eligible to vote. And there are a few other requirements, such as you must be living in the school district and you must have had lived in the school district for a certain number of months or years, that kind of requirements. Now, these are all encoded in the state education law. There are separate sections in the state law for the Big Five. These are the biggest 5 cities with populations more than 125,000 residents. For these Big Five school districts, education is part of the city government. So those Big Fives are Syracuse and Rochester. They have 7 elected members. Buffalo, which has 9 elected members. Yonkers, which is actually the only other city school district under mayoral control. And Yonkers has 9 members appointed by the mayor. And New York City, which actually has its own separate section in the state law as a city with a population of more than 1 million residents. So New York City has a completely appointed, actually, I shouldn't say completely appointed. It has 23 members appointed by the mayor, borough president, and elected by CEC presidents. That is how the big picture statewide. So you can see most of the state, in most of the state, school districts have elected boards of education. Big Five, that's all the cities you see there, are slightly different, except if you noticed, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and Yonkers have members that are between 7 and 9 members. New York City has 23. Next slide. 4 of the Big Five in New York State, that's Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and Yonkers, they appoint superintendents. They authorize courses of study for schools. I think they get to decide what schools are going to teach. They authorize and determine textbooks, essentially choosing curricula. They develop a plan to ensure that all instructional materials are available in a usable alternative format for each student with disability. This is cut and paste from the law. This is how it's stated. It has a specific mandate for these school boards to ensure serving students with disabilities appropriately and adequately. They can also lease properties for schools and purchase materials and supplies for schools. They can prescribe regulations and bylaws, and they are required to prepare a school district report card. It's not terribly different from what the New York City Board of Education is authorized to do, but I wanted to give you an overview of what these 4 of the big 5 school boards in New York State are enabled to do. Next slide. Just wanted to highlight the second largest school district in New York State, which is Buffalo Public Schools, to give you a sense of the size of the second largest school district. The population of Buffalo is about 280,000 people. The board has 9 elected members, and there are 6 members representing 6 districts within Buffalo, which is interesting. These members are elected from within that sub-districts. 3 members at large, they represent the entire district. And K through 12 enrollment is 28,508 students, according to the New York State Education Department data for the school year 2021-2022. And the school district has about 60 schools. I want to put this in context with New York City. So we'll move on to what does it look like in New York City? One of only 2 school districts in New York State with mayoral control, along with Yonkers. We have 1 chancellor. Now we're going to do a little quiz here. How many community school districts do we have? You can put your answer in the chat. How many community school districts are there in New York City? Thank you. Yep. Okay. 32 community school districts. And yes, there are District 75 and District 79, and then there's District 84, which are charter schools. But the community school districts, the geographical boundaries, there are 32. How about superintendents? Folks on the PEP, you cannot answer this question because you already know. How many superintendents do we have in the New York City public school system? Excellent. 45. That's right. 32 community district superintendents. And I'm trying to do the math in my head here. I'm very slow. 13. Okay, 13 other superintendents. One is a special education superintendent, and the other ones are high school superintendents. How about how many schools do we have in the New York City school district? A lot. Yes, we have a lot. We sure do. And this is sort of a trick question because I'm not counting charter schools in this because charter schools are not under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education. We have, according to the Schools at a Glance from the DOE website, 1,592 schools. Okay, so that's a lot, plus 275 or so charter schools that are not under the jurisdiction of the Board of Education, otherwise known as the Panel for Educational Policy. How many students? Not an exact number, just a rough figure would do. And I know we have been talking a lot about enrollment decline and all that. Yes, roughly 1 million students. So let's compare these statistics with the second largest school district, which is Buffalo. Next slide. Okay, I picked some of the school districts. I picked actually Community School District 2 because that is my district and it's one of the larger ones in the city. And I picked 2 other districts that are similar in enrollment to the Buffalo school system. Here's the table that shows you the school district with total enrollment and number of schools. Buffalo, 28,508 students, 61 schools. District 2, 60,327 students and 119 schools. This is K through 12, so it includes all the high schools. K through 8, under the community superintendents, we have about 52 schools. Community School District 9 has 31,124 students with about 70 schools. Community School District 26 in Queens has 31,661 students with about 34 schools. Well, not about, 34 schools are in that district. Just to give you a sense of the scale of our system, because it is actually important to understand how some of the other school districts organizations may not work well in New York City. We have to think about whether the Board of Education with 9 members, which is what some of the other school districts have, or even 7 members in some others, is that enough? We right now have 23. Maybe that's too many. There's a request to go back to the last slide, so I will quickly do that. By the way, the slides will be shared, so you don't have to be taking any notes. And these are numbers that you can get from the Department of Education websites. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slides. We did this one. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, my animation isn't working. Just going to quickly do that. So to look at students in New York City public school system, 21% are students with disabilities who have individual education plans. 14% are English language learners. These are statistics from the last school year. I expect these percentages to go higher this current school year because we've taken in a lot of students. 73% of schools or students are economically disadvantaged, and there is a criteria the federal government uses. And 104,000 students are in temporary housing. So these are the students served by the New York City public school system. Next slide. So needless to say, we have a very complicated system here in New York City. At the school level, these are the entities or organizations that have a role in how schools are run. We have parents, students, principals, teachers, and staff at the school level who have a role in their school community. As organizations, we have the Parent-Teacher Association, Parent Association, that's the parents group. We have the school leadership team, which is made up of parents and teachers and the administrator and students. And if your school is a Title I school, then you have the Title I Parents Advisory Council. That's the school level organizations. Then you go to the community school district level, we have all these entities operating to improve our schools. There's a district level Title I Parent Advisory Council. There's the district leadership team. There's the superintendent and the district offices. And there's the community education councils. And there are the president's councils. This is a very complicated school governance system that we have in the city. And then there are citywide councils and Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council. The citywide councils are in the state law. We have Citywide Council on Special Education, Citywide Council on English Language Learners, Citywide Council on High Schools, and Citywide Council for District 75. And separately, we have the Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council, which is made up of presidents of the president's councils. And then there is what I'm calling the mayor's circle, which has the mayor and the chancellor and the Board of Education, which you all know this as the Panel for Educational Policy, or the PEP. Next slide. Oops. So the governing bodies that exist, well, all those little groups that I just showed you, not all of them are necessarily considered the governing bodies. So the governing bodies are the Panel for Educational Policy, the 4 citywide education councils that I mentioned, and the 32 community education councils. These are theoretically the policy-making bodies for the school system in New York City. And then there's the school level policy-making entities, the school leadership teams, of which we have 1,592, because that's how many schools we have in New York City. And there's a comment in the chat, yet community education councils have very little direct impact. Correct, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this mayoral control workshop. Next slide. Oh, the Panel for Educational Policy is actually legally the New York City Board of Education. You will not find the Panel for Educational Policy anywhere in the state law. In the state law, it is still the New York City Board of Education. PEP is a name Mayor Bloomberg gave the body and is somehow stuck. So we still call it the PEP, but legally it is the New York City Board of Education. But there is no shared decision-making structure, right? We are laughing at the policy-making governing entities because theoretically that's what those bodies are, but as Yana put it in the chat, school leadership teams are pretty much run by principals. I cannot argue with that statement. So let's talk about mayoral control. That is what we have here. The mayor makes all the decisions, period. One person, one man, who is not a career educator. Let's remember that too. The mayor selects the chancellor. The mayor appoints the majority of the PEP members. The mayor sets the educational priorities. One person who currently is not an educator makes all the decisions for our kids. The last mayor was not an educator. The mayor before that was not an educator. Next slide. I'm going to take you on a brief tour of mayoral control since 2003 and how mayoral control has impacted our schools, families, and students over 3 mayors that we've had since mayoral control went into effect. Test score-based grade promotion policy. In March 2004, Mayor Bloomberg dismissed 3 of his appointees on the panel for educational policy because they were going to vote against his grade promotion policy, which would automatically hold back students who scored in level 1 on standardized tests. This is known as the Black Monday. This happened on a Monday right before the PEP meeting. And he specifically removed these 3 members who were going to vote against this policy. Research is clear, retaining students, except for extreme cases, does not help the students, particularly if you base the decision on only a single metric of standardized test scores. That was a bad policy. And 3 members that were mayoral appointees wanted to vote against that policy, yet he dismissed them and replaced them with people who would vote his will. Next slide. Multiple organizations of the system. Mayor Bloomberg reorganized the whole system at least 3 times during his tenure. Every time he reorganized, there was a system-wide confusion and lack of clarity on accountability. For example, who is responsible for what? When he first came in, he organized the 32 community school districts into regions. And I believe there are 9 or 10 different regions. Manhattan was one region, plus Community School District 7 in the South Bronx got thrown in with a Manhattan. We had a regional superintendent. That in itself may not have been a bad structure, but he did that without consulting anybody. He didn't consult the principals. He didn't consult parents. He didn't consult community education councils or the school board. He just decided, I'm a corporate guy. I'm going to reorganize my company. Here's how it's going to be. Top down, no input. And then a while later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, some of you old timers probably remember this, he decided to reorganize yet again and created Children First Networks or whatever they were called. And then he did that again towards the end of his tenure. Every time this happened, nobody knew who was in charge, what the chain of command was, who you had to go to get issues addressed. And that was all done by the mayor single-handedly. Next slide. Cell phone ban. This was another famous one. Mayor Bloomberg unilaterally banned cell phones from schools despite many parents demanding that their children be allowed to have cell phones for safety reasons. Remember, this is post 9/11. Parents needed to know where their kids were. For those older kids who are commuting on their own, we wanted to know where they were. Yet, cell phones were banned from schools. And it actually sprouted a whole cottage industry in some neighborhoods where people parked their vans and they would charge students to hold onto their phones. And those were the Black and brown communities where this cottage industry sprouted up. In rich white districts, nobody checked their cell phones because they went to school without metal detectors. Talk about inequity. And this was a policy that Mayor Bloomberg forcibly put forward. Next slide. Oh, charter school proliferation. During Mayor Bloomberg's terms, 173 charter schools opened. When he became mayor, there were about a dozen charter schools. He lobbied to change the state law to increase the cap on charter schools so that he can help open more charter schools and for charter schools to receive free space paid for by public school funds. This legacy still continues, right? We still have a cap, thank goodness, but last year there was a huge battle, and actually New York City ended up having 11 more charters open this school year. But New York City has to pay for rent for charter schools that are in a private facility. Or we have to give up our school buildings to site charter schools. This is all Mayor Bloomberg's doing. He was a big charter proponent, and he paved the way for these laws to change and for charter schools to really expand under his tenure. Next slide. School closures. He was big on this. Mayor Bloomberg's school reform initiative included closing failing, quote unquote, schools with low standardized test scores. He closed more than 150 schools, in many cases despite opposition by parents, students, and teachers. And again, depending solely on test scores, he made decisions. It didn't matter if the school was actually serving students, empowering them to learn and to become lifelong learners. Those things didn't matter if the school had low test scores. It didn't matter that school may have had students who had low test scores and the school was actually able to move them up a level or two or point or two. It didn't matter. It was all about standardized test scores compared to the citywide average test scores. And that was mayoral control. It didn't matter if parents and students showed up and pleaded with the PEP not to close their schools because their schools were actually serving them. He went ahead and closed them. Next slide. And that was tied into the small schools fad. It was a fad driven by an infusion of cash from the Gates Foundation, of the Bill Gates Foundation. Mayor Bloomberg closed many large high schools and replaced them with hundreds of small schools, many co-located in the same building. Since then, even Bill Gates has admitted the small schools reform movement didn't work. This was a philanthropist with a ton of money driving public policy, not based on research or data. But Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates were buddies. Bill Gates was willing to spend millions of dollars on this fad movement, and Bloomberg went along with it. We have very few large schools left because of this. And we have schools that have 6 or 7 different schools co-located in the same building. Talk about inefficient use of space. Oh, and as a corollary, I've spoken to principals of one school that has 6 high schools co-located. None of the schools was using the library because the 6 schools could not coordinate scheduling because there was no one person whose responsibility it was to schedule shared facilities. So there is a library in the school building, but no student was using it. Side effect of co-locations that are done in this way. Next slide. Let's move on to the next mayor. Pen pals as a school desegregation initiative. Some of you probably remember this. Chancellor Farina suggested a pen pal program instead of structural reforms to desegregate our schools. This was in response to resource allocation that was inequitable and student enrollment that were segregating our schools. And advocates were calling for the 5 R's of school integration, which I'm not going to go into, but it's a very reasonable, smart approach to desegregating our schools developed by a group of students. And the chancellor's answer to that was, oh, we'll just start a pen pal program between the school in Hunts Point and schools in the village. I'm not sure how far that program went, but it was launched as a program. Next slide. Keeping 5 specialized high schools under mayoral authority. There are 5 specialized high schools designated by the mayor. Mayor de Blasio had the authority to de-designate these schools as specialized high schools as a way to increase access to these schools for Black, Brown, and low-income students. And this was recommended by the School Diversity Advisory Group. Yet he did not exercise his power. All the while he talked about equity and school integration and all the talk about equitable distribution of resources, equitable admissions. He talked the talk, but didn't walk the walk. And this is one example. Next slide. Forced resignation of a PEP member. So when Bill de Blasio ran for mayor, he promised that he would not remove any PEP members who might vote against his proposal. We have written record of that. But one of Mayor de Blasio's appointees voted against his school closure proposal. The PEP member was forced out and made to resign against her will. De Blasio promised not to remove any of his appointees during his campaign, but did not follow through. The way this was done is this PEP member was shut out from all briefings, all document sharing. She was kept in the dark completely and pressured to resign. So it wasn't a removal. The mayor didn't fire the member, but the mayor made it such this member was not going to be able to serve her responsibilities because she was completely shut out. Next slide. Let's talk about the current mayor. He abandoned the culturally responsive curriculum. Outgoing Mayor de Blasio committed more than $200 million to develop a culturally responsive curriculum for all New York City schools. The plan was abandoned by Mayor Adams shortly after he took office. This is actually an important point of mayoral control. Important programs that really make a difference for students. New initiatives that are really important for making a difference for students. Those can disappear with a new mayor. Things can go completely 180 degrees different with a new mayor. There is no continuity. And that is something we have to remember with this mayoral control system. Every 4 to 8 years, the system can undergo significant changes. Next slide. Locked school building doors. This is new and still raw for many of us. In February 2023, the mayor announced every school building will install a locked door system with a camera and a buzzer system. This was a unilateral decision with a price tag of $43 million without involving parents in the planning. Right? This very last part, without involving parents in the planning, that's huge. Why are we making these plans and committing this kind of money without talking to the school community and the parents and the students first? And many students will tell you, locked doors do not make them feel safe. Nope. Next slide. Housing asylum seekers in school gyms without input. Another one of his faux pas. In May 2023, Mayor Adams announced some of the asylum seekers will be housed in school gyms without first consulting the school communities or thinking through the needs of the asylum seekers thoughtfully. I think these are relatively new. I don't have to tell you the details. You all know the details. It was madness when this was announced. School communities didn't know this was happening. Parents didn't know what was happening. Parents couldn't get an answer to what they were going to do for gym for their kids. Nobody had the answer. Flooded school buildings and dangerous commute. Ooh, this is fresh. September 29th, 2023, despite the weather officials' warning, Mayor Adams did not take precautions, resulting in children walking home in flooded streets or taking expensive cab rides home. I know at least one person who had to drop something like $200 to make sure that her child got home. He said anyone caught off guard is living under a rock. That's a quote. Anyone caught off guard is living under a rock. Yet he didn't close the school, so teachers are supposed to go to school. Families went to school. That's not living under the rock. So, I'm just going to recap the problems with mayoral control. What do you see as the problems? Put your thoughts in the chat, but I think you put a lot of them already. And I will quickly summarize what some of us have been seeing as the problem with mayoral controls. Problem number one, chancellor appointment. The mayor selects and appoints the chancellor without any input from anyone or any public process. We have absolutely no say over who's going to be the chancellor. It's only up to the mayor. Chancellor serves at the pleasure of the mayor, which means the chancellor only has to answer to the mayor, nobody else. Not the students, not the parents, not the PEP, not the teachers, not the unions, only to the mayor. Chancellor carries out the priorities of the mayor or is left to carry out their own agenda. Right? Nobody's setting priorities but the mayor and the chancellor. The PEP doesn't even vote on educational priorities for the city of New York unless it has a price tag and the contract. Then the PEP gets to vote on the contract. Problem number two, the PEP. Mayor appoints the majority. It's nothing personal, Caleres. The PEP as a structure is the problem, not the good people who are serving on it. Some of the good people who are serving on it. Okay. Mayor appoints the majority. Mayoral appointees who vote against the mayor are forced to resign. It is made untenable for them to stay in their role if they go against the mayor. PEP does not vote on every educational policy proposal. And that's a big thing you have to remember. They vote on contracts. They vote on school closures. They vote on school utilization changes, such as co-locations, grade truncations, or grade expansions, or mergers. But not what should be educational priorities. Which curriculum to use. Unless there is a price tag, then there is a lever. Problem number 3, the citywide and community education councils. Citywide and community education councils have very little legal authority, period. Those of you who have served on these bodies know very well. As Jessamine says, we're screaming into the void. Thank you for serving on the PEP, Jessamine and Caleris. It might be screaming in the wind and into the void, but we still need you there. But I digress. Only community education councils with zoned schools have school rezoning authority. So out of the 32 community school districts, 3 of them don't even have school zones. That's District 1, 7, and 23, I believe. So they don't even have that zoning authority. The rest of the community education councils at least have that rezoning authority where DOE cannot redraw the school catchment zones without approval from the CEC. But they can close a zoned school without CEC approval, even though a reasonable person would argue if you close a zoned school, you are changing the zone, and that should be subject to CEC approval. But somehow the DOE has gotten away with closing zoned schools without CEC approval. Again, that's because the mayor has the power to do everything and anything he wants to do. Mayor, the chancellor, and the PEP can make decisions without any input from citywide or community education councils, or ignore input from CCECs. Many CECs submit resolutions opposing one thing or another. I think there are even times when 10 CECs and citywide councils submitted the same resolution against a policy. Those oppositions don't need to be legally taken into consideration in the decision-making process by the chancellor or the PEP. Citywide councils and community education councils are supported by FACE, the Family and Community Empowerment, or whatever this acronym stands for now. That is a fox guarding the hen house. Citywide and community education councils are supposed to be the checks and balances to the Department of Education. They cannot be supported and trained by those people that we're supposed to be holding accountable. That's like you're the boss, you have staff, and the staff is going to train you. Something is completely nonsensical here. Many of us have been advocating for citywide and community education councils to be supported and trained by a third party, not the Department of Education, but completely separate, independent entity. And that is something we have to think about. So to put it simply, here are what we see as the problem. One person makes all the decisions. Whether it's the mayor or the chancellor, in the end, it is one person. Everything is top down because it's the top person making the decisions. Everything comes from the top. There is nothing bottom up in this system. No checks and balances, or very little checks and balances. The mayor can get away with a lot. The chancellor can also get away with a lot. And that means parents have no voice. Students have no voice. And I don't have it as a slide, but teachers on the ground don't have a voice either, because to be honest, the union doesn't always represent the voice of the teachers in the classroom. So here's where we get to do the good stuff. What do we do? Get involved. I'm really, really grateful that there are so many people in this space on a Friday evening, giving up time with your family to have this conversation. That is amazing to me, and I'm so grateful to you. So here are some things you can do immediately. The Commissioner of New York State Education Department is tasked with producing a report on mayoral control. This is what the state legislature decided to do last time. It's behind schedule, but that's okay. And as part of the law, the commissioner has to hold public hearings, the first of which is happening next week on Tuesday in the Bronx, which is the reason why we're doing this on a Friday evening. We wanted to be sure we share this information with you before the first public hearing. And again, we'll be sharing the PowerPoint, so you don't have to take down notes. PowerPoint will have links as well, so you don't have to take down any of these dates right now. But just remember, there are 5 public hearings coming up. So if you can attend, please do. You can also submit written comments. There's an email address for you to submit written comments, and you can do that until January 31st. So be thinking about it. And you don't have to make it a technical comment. You can share your own personal experience of how this system has failed you and your student, your child. And that's probably a better public comment letter than the wonky, one person making decisions. It's top down. We need more bottom up decision making. You don't have to put any of that. You can simply share things that have not worked for you and your child as your comment. And that would be a powerful testimony. And yes, Heather, get your kids to submit a comment. That is a great idea. Okay, next slide. I have some talking points, which I'm not going to go into because it's a lot. I will be sharing the PowerPoint and you can take a look at it. There are just so many different angles and so many different things you can say and do. Okay, Lorraine, you're not getting any slides from us. I will be using the Zoom registration link today to send out slides. So you have to register to be here today, which means I have your email address, and I will definitely send the slide deck to you all using the email address you registered for this. Okay. So The slide deck will have some talking points, but there are also other partners who are preparing talking points, which we'll definitely share with you. So I have a couple of these talking points. Interpreters, I'm skipping these slides over, so you don't have to translate these or interpret these ones. Here are the groups that we are building partnerships with. Some of them may not know that I'm adding their logos on this slide, but we're all friends and family. So I'm thinking ask for forgiveness, not permission, Alliance for Quality Education, New York City Kids Political Action Committee, Brooklyn Movement Center, Racially Just Public Schools, New York City Coalition to Finally End Mayoral Control, and Movement of Rank and File Educators. These are some of the organizations that we are building partnerships with to build this movement to end mayoral control, but more importantly, envision a different system, right? We can advocate to end mayoral control, but if we don't have a different system to put in its place, we can't go anywhere because we don't necessarily want the old school board system. There are a lot of problems with that. And one of the things that I personally like, because I'm not a US citizen, so I'm being selfish, but I was able to serve on the community education councils because you do not need to be a US citizen. You just need to be a parent with a kid in a public school. And I think that is something actually good that we should keep moving forward. If you go back to the old school board, you have to be a voter, right? You have to have US citizenship. You don't have to have a kid in the public school to run for the school board. But we do need to envision and imagine a different system that is, some people call it community control, right? We need to empower the people on the ground to make important decisions that affect our kids. That's not to say there is no role for central DOE. There is still some role that they should play that can bring all 32 community school districts together. Because last thing we need is 32 separate, completely separate community school districts. I don't think that is the way to go. But we need to really be creative and think out of the box to come up with a new system. And we need all of us to do that work together. I've got a couple links, but there's a lot more. This will also be shared with you when you get that slide deck. I'm putting the Parent Commission on School Governance report in there because I was a member of that group. It was a grassroots ad hoc group of parents who came together and met every month for 9 months to develop an alternative. I'm not necessarily advocating that we implement what we developed then, but there is a lot of good stuff in that report still. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and open up the room for discussion, thoughts, ideas, questions, whatever you want to talk about. Oh, but before I do that, I have to do this. I have to have an evaluation because we'd like to know what worked and what doesn't. And then we also have a donate button, which, you know, we're a grassroots nonprofit, so I have to do that. But I'm going to stop sharing for now. And I'll put up the donation and the evaluation again.
Shino, can you also drop the links for the evaluation and the donation in the chat?
Good idea. I will do that. So, I'm going to take a chance because the chat is really great. you can actually unmute yourself. So the floor is open for any comments, thoughts, reactions. If you want to just kvetch away. But if you want to imagine a brand new world, that would be great too. And the interpreters, are there any comments or questions from the Spanish room? Oh, do I have to do something to hear the interpreters? No. Okay. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Heather. I see you. I'm in a very public place and can't speak here, but I love the chat. Great.
Lupe has her
Oh,
hand.
okay, Lupe, go ahead.
Thanks, guys. Good evening, all, and thank you all for being here. It just shows how many people really care. I just want to quickly highlight two things, some of which I saw in the chat. I want to just let folks know, like, we're in this space to collectively gather these ideas. Nothing is set in stone. And the next 5 hearings that are coming up are just an opportunity for you to share experiences of why you know this isn't working. And I would, you don't have to give our state legislators the answer of what needs to be replaced. I think if you're, I see in the chat that like people are like, but what do we do instead? And yes, that is something that's going to take more than the next 3 or 4 months to come up with. And so don't let that deter you or someone else that may say, well, we don't know what it's going to be. And what are we supposed to do? Like, these next hearings is a chance for us to say why this isn't working. We know it's not working. I think our state legislators 2 years ago when we came knew it wasn't working. What we asked at that time was to create a commission similar to what took place prior to mayoral control being implemented. And we can ask for that again, and we can ask for time to actually figure this out because it's not something we're going to figure out tonight. So I don't want that to just discourage anyone here on this call that may be finding out about mayoral control for the first time, and just center that, like, what we could share with our state legislators is what we know, and it's not working. And I will say, I read the reports, I read the task force back in 2019, that all of those, it all still exists. In fact, it's compounded. For every reason that we got rid of our school boards, those problems still exist 10 times fold. It's even on a more larger scale when we're talking about mismanaging our budget because of the way the contracts are, they're passed through the PEP and then how they're procured. It's just, the corruption is beyond on another level than we never imagined. So just keep that in mind. And then one quickly, please sign up. If you plan on going to the Bronx, sign up now. You have to sign up now. What they're not telling folks is that registration to speak closes 48 hours before the hearing. They're not telling that to anybody, and or before the slots fill up. Meaning, if in the first 10 minutes of the link being live, if I don't know how many slots, but they're allotting 3 minutes per person, and they said they may go past 9, but if they're calculating from 6 to 9, mathematicians in the room, please, that's 3 minutes divided by how those 3 hours, they're going to stop letting you register once that's filled. So you cannot just show up to a hearing. And if anyone on this call may be able to clarify for me, is it true that you're not allowed to speak at more than one hearing? So you are only allowed, okay, thank you. So remember that and choose wisely. I plan on showing up to all of them, but apparently I will only be speaking at one. So just want to highlight. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Lupe. Let me just look at. Next up is Caleris.
Hi, everybody. I put my contact in the chat if anybody wants to talk about the lived experience of a PEP member that is not a mayoral. We call ourselves the non-mayorals. But I did want to say that the commissioner is paying for a lawyer to look into the governance structure, and that lawyer is preparing a literature review with some proposals of what it could be. I don't know what those proposals are, but we can certainly try to engage her in that conversation and see what we can contribute to that. So don't, it's just to reinforce what people are saying, like, don't feel like you have to have a proposal. Focus on your lived experience, because that work is being done, right? So we want to communicate how ineffective and undemocratic the system is, and how it is negatively impacting not just our children, but the future of New York City. I think we have to like continue to say this in terms of big picture, how detrimental it is to our children, the future of the city, and the success of the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Caleris. Amanda?
Hi, I was just wondering, does anyone have good links to back at the start of mayoral control, all of the controversies that happened then? One of the things that I'm looking at is that the city from like 1900 to 1975, we redrew the districts about every 10 years. And in 1975, we suddenly stopped. And I know as part of implementing mayoral control, they looked at, do we need to redraw the district lines? And there was a whole bunch of controversy. And basically they're like, no, we're keeping everything the same. So that's why we've ended up with, there's 5 districts in Manhattan, and one of them is very large and the other ones aren't. And so I want to look at the other controversies that happened right when we implemented
They can't buzz it. It doesn't work. Yeah.
Oops.
It's broken.
I don't think she was. So redistricting is still on the books. It's supposed to happen every 10 years. 2024, next year, is actually supposed to be a decadal redistricting year. Back in 2014, I reached out to the DOE and my state senator and said, this is the redistricting year. What are we doing about it? And the DOE just had some excuse for not doing it. I think the person that I spoke to at that time said, oh, it's not the DOE who does that, it's the PEP. Well, PEP is the DOE at the moment because it has majority mayoral appointees. So yes, that is still on the books. It's still supposed to be happening every 10 years. But this is one of the things that is an issue with the state law. The city has broken the state law many, many times, but there is no teeth in the law. Nothing bad happens when the city breaks the law. So that's just something to think about. Enforcing the law has been very difficult. I've got people with hands up. So Jonathan.
I just thought that it would be interesting or helpful to kind of talk about what I am thinking about saying when I give testimony. And these are things that I've noticed in the district that I've been on the CEC on. They're things I've noticed in my kids' schools that aren't working. I've seen principals who are completely incompetent, who are appointed without any parent or teacher input and left in place for far too long. I've seen proposals made from parents and teachers that are really common sense and had a lot of, would be very popular in the school that were just rejected out of hand by administrators. And the same thing sometimes on a district level. And those things, you don't think about those things, associate those things with mayoral control. When you think about mayoral control, you think about the PEP, you think about how decisions are made for the system as a whole, but it's all very much connected, right? The fact that we have a process for appointing principals that doesn't really give any power to anybody but the superintendent, that is a product of our current school governing system. And if we had more control, if parents and teachers and everybody had more control, we would be able to fix that. It wouldn't be easy, and we're not going to get a perfect system. I think that, anybody who thinks that we're going to fix it all overnight is kind of dreaming, but we can do a lot better, and we can have a say in how the system works in a way that we don't right now. So, think about think about what's not working for you. Think about what you've seen, what people in your community are, have experienced, and talk about that at these hearings, or submit written testimony.
Thank you, Jonathan. Lorraine?
Hi, yeah. I'm one of those people who has taught under different governance systems. I started my career, believe it or not, in Florida, and I worked under a pilot program called school-based management because I was based in the Florida Keys, and it was a very expansive, location. And so, but the school-based management that we had then is nothing like the watered down school leadership teams now. And I also worked under the local school districts and, of course, mayoral control. And I agree that the local school districts were very corrupt, and I lived through that, and that mayoral control is just a more expensive corruption. But I'm confused about how there's all these different systems. You have school leadership teams that involve parents and teachers that are supposed to be working together with administration, but usually doesn't work because there are no checks and balances. Then you have a district leadership team and a CEC. And I'm assuming that I'm new to this level of involvement because I spent nearly 40 years in a classroom. The district leadership team, I assume it involves parents and pedagogy and administration. But then you have the CEC, which I am on now, but it consists of all parents, and supposedly they're supposed to have the power of resolutions, and yet there are no educators on that team. The city leadership team again seems to be or should be equivalent to the PEP. I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying here, but the PEP, I mean, I would just abolish it completely. But again, the DLT and the CLT need to have massive checks and balances. And something I was thinking about, with all this corruption is perhaps someone from the controller's office could guide us with that, or anybody, I'm not sure that it has to be the controller's office, but we need some way to figure out how to structure the governance to get some control over these contracts and corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that's a lot. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Just one thing. So the DLT is pretty specific to developing the district comprehensive education plan, right? So they're data driven. They look at test scores, attendance at the district level. And it's also all the schools within the geographic confines of the district. So it includes high schools, not just K through 8. And they sit together. There's the union reps for DC 37, UFT, CSA. There's the President's Council president. And now, legally, there has to be a member of the Community Education Council as well. and they look at district-wide data on students and come up with a district comprehensive education plan. So that is a very particular and specific mandate. CLT is not an official body. So I just wanted, and that's the citywide leadership team. That is something that a couple parent advocates started on their own, but it's not a mandate anywhere. It does not exist as a legal entity. So I just wanted to clarify that. Jasmine, go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I co-sign a lot of what Lorraine was talking about. You know, I started my teaching. I'm no longer teaching for the DOE. I want to very clarify, but you know, I started teaching for the DOE when it was the BOE, and then the DOE. You know, and now I have the privilege of having two disabled kids, you know, being educated in this system, and have served on the PEP for about the last year. And you know, mayoral control just point blank does not work. Full stop, it does not. You know, we have to be very careful, I think, as advocates in what we ask for, because a reversion to the BOE would be disastrous. It was also a sub-ideal, kind of terrible system, rife with, as others have said, rife with corruption. You know, and I would be really happy if we were put out of the job, you know, put out of a job. But one thing I want to point out to folks, which doesn't ever get talked about in terms of the PEP, and I think one of the reasons we have so many members on the PEP who, yes, happen to be mayoral appointees, who seem to have no interest in education whatsoever. Not only no background as a parent or as an educator, but frankly, no interest in education whatsoever, is because one of the things that's enshrined in state law is that we are also trustees on the Board of Education Retirement Pension Fund, you know, the BERS system. And folks are there because being a trustee on a $9 billion pension fund gets them into the professional spaces they want to be in. And that is the only reason for showing up. And otherwise, you know, they sit there on the PEP doing whatever the mayor tells them to do to maintain this professional affiliation. And they show up every month and listen to impassioned pleas by educators and parents, and then harm them for their own personal gain. And it's disheartening and soul crushing every month, but the PEP has caused real harm in addition to misuse of money. And I'm setting aside money, but you know, Caliris can testify the things that were done that were universally opposed by all to transfer schools last year, at the end of last year, have caused physical harm, life-threatening harm to students so that people can personally enrich themselves. And it's disgusting. And this system has to go. So please sign up for the hearings. Put me out of a job, please. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Just to be clear, PEP members are not paid. So when
Yes,
we
my
put you
volunteer
out
did.
of the job, we're
Put me
going
out of
to
a
give
position.
we're going to give you back the expenses that you shoulder on your own and the time back.
I'm not going to show up every month complaining about what it costs me to participate in the PEP. I'm happy to serve the public of New York. But yeah, please put us out of our position. You know, it doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts?
I can't seem to find my raise hand function, Shino. I'm sorry.
You can go right ahead and talk, girl.
Just for those who are still kind of confused and like, well, what's the alternative? The simple ask is just reduce the mayor's appointees. That is the first ask we should make when we're talking about like, what's the other solution? Well, he just got 7 more appointees. Reduce them and keep the elected ones because they were elected by the parents. And it's like, if we continue focusing an approach of democracy and what true democracy actually is, and not the performance theater that it's become. But, for those who are just struggling with like, well, I have a very, raucous CEC, like I'm afraid to give them, control, more control. I hear you. I hear you. A lot of us understand that particular fear, but without the democratic measure, we're in a vicious cycle where we're going to keep losing teachers, we're going to keep losing service providers, and our children are going to continue not being supported. So it's like, yes, I understand the fear, but if we just start with reducing the number of mayoral appointees on the PEP and coincide with creating the task force to actually look at the data and come up with a concrete structure to replace mayoral control, that is a reasonable fight and response. So on the off chance that they ask, the the attendees at the feedback session, whether, like, well, what's your alternative? That is your alternative.
Also, let's remember that people that you might be talking to about this issue, they're paid to do public policy work. It's not on us as volunteers and parents to come up with the solutions, but when they develop solutions, we'd better be included in the idea generation, right? We may not come up with the alternatives, but we can tell them parents need to be part of the decision making for anything and everything that goes on in the public school system. And then the details of what that looks like can be done with people who are paid to do that work, who went to college and graduate school to do that work. But we have to start using our voice. You don't need to be an expert because we're not experts, but we have the lived experiences, and that's our expertise. And that's what they need to know, because they don't have, the people who make the laws, who write the laws, they don't have the on the ground experience. Jonathan.
I just want to mention that the ECC, along with a bunch of other organizations, including more UFT, has come up with a one-pager that should be like a ready reference in advance of the hearings, and we will send that out to all of you with the slides for this presentation. So I really hope that helps everybody if they just need some ideas or refresher on what mayoral control is.
Thank you, Jonathan. Heather?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I just also wanted to say, like, and I want to point to Bassey High School and how they wanted to put a charter in that school. And so many parents got together and students got together in large numbers. And that really made an impact. And so I think my focus for my serving on the council, on the citywide council for special education over the past term and this term, is really to unsilo us, because, and I've done a lot of busing advocacy and like just unsiloing even all the little pockets of people that are organized doing that advocacy, so we can all be one front to advocate. And so I just encourage, like, if you're going to testify and write testimony, bring a friend and have them testify too. Bring two friends, because numbers really are powerful. Like 2 or 3 parents speaking up, they listen, but they don't make the same impact as if 300 or 500 parents show up, right? And so I think numbers are really important about getting your voices out there, organizing parents to speak up, and then helping those who may not understand all the technology and this and that and how to submit stuff and stuff. You can also help folks as well. And also, it's important to know that you don't have to send your testimony in English. You can write it in whatever language you want and submit it, And so we don't want like language access to discourage parents. We don't want technology access to discourage parents. And we're here to help. I'm here to help. If you need help submitting testimony, please, like hunt me down. I'm pretty easy to find. People can find. And I'm more than willing to help because it's really important that we all work together. So I'm happy to see that flyer with all the names of all the organizations that were working on this and working together. And I hope that we continue to do that because I think that's what's most important is when you see a huge front of people that's like, this is not okay. It just makes a bigger impact.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to check in with Megan and Maria to see if there's any feedback or questions from the Spanish room. Ah, okay. Yes. Thank you. They're asking the Spanish speakers. And we are almost at the end of our time anyway. Thank you, Jonathan. The one pagers in the chat. And I'm going to put the evaluation link one more time, if I can find that link and make sure there's I was speaking slowly for the interpreters today. I don't usually speak this slowly. I'm looking for the evaluation form link because I really am very interested in hearing your feedback on how we do these sessions. So just give me 1 second while I do that. And it seems like the Spanish room doesn't have any questions or comments. So I'm going to let you go because it's 7:30. Maria and Megan, thank you so very much for not only translating the flyer and the PowerPoint, but also interpreting today. We really appreciate you. And everybody else, thank you so much for giving us your Friday evening. I am so happy to see so many people having nothing better to do than to be here. Love you all. And Jonathan, thank you. He's actually the school governance committee chair of the Education Council Consortium. So he's been doing the lion's share of this work. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, members of the PEP, for doing what you do. We really appreciate you. So have a good night and have a great weekend, everyone.